What if you were able to switch your negative beliefs about yourself and about other people close to you into beliefs that served you in terms of where you want to go? What if we just open that window up? What if we just say to ourselves, you know what? I am just going to accept that this is my truth. Welcome to the Ignited Recovery Podcast, a new way forward for anyone looking for answers but feeling left out. If you've been searching for empowerment, triumph, and purpose, you've found them right here. You won't hear the same solutions, and you're not going to have any excuses to fall back on, because Ignited Recovery allows heroes to rise and become their best selves. I'm Dr. Adi Jaffe, and I can't wait to be your guide on this journey. Are you ready to become an ignited hero? We've all been hearing about the microbiome and how important it is for our health. It's kind of funny, right? Only 10 years ago, we believed that killing the bacteria on everything was the way to go. I mean, do you remember those sanitizer sprays everywhere? And now we're gradually learning that, surprise, surprise, not really, we actually need the bacteria around us to thrive and even survive. The thing is that everybody's been focusing almost exclusively on the bacteria in your body that helps you digest food. And that is really important, because if you can't digest it, you can't live off of the nutrients, and then you develop all sort of GI problems, and you have to... Never mind. But research has been showing us an incredible connection between bacteria in your gut and your mental health. Seriously. For instance, studies have shown that the bacteria in the gut of an animal can change its level of depression. And more research is coming out showing that the same exact thing probably plays a role in anxiety, depression, maybe even autism and ADHD. Isn't that amazing? So I did some research and I decided to add a probiotic mix that helps not only mood, but also the communication between my gut and the brain. It's called Amare, and their wellness kit takes care of everything that I need. The probiotics that have been researched to provide actual tangible help, and the prebiotics and everything that those bacteria need to thrive and do their work. I've been using it myself for 3 months, and I gotta say, it's really helped regulate my mood and keep me even. And it's helping me feel less foggy too, especially in the morning. Look, these guys really did their research, and this stuff is top notch. If you want to get it for yourself, just follow the link in our show notes and you can join the mind biome revolution with me. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Ignited Recovery Secrets podcast. I'm Adi Jaffe, and I wanted to share with you today a little gift. So we interviewed Bruce Lipton, who wrote a book that I love, The Biology of Belief, and we interviewed him for the Relationship podcast. Sophie and I did that, but that's not coming out for a while. So I recorded for you a little bit of insight into the lessons from this book, specifically relevant to addiction and the sort of mental health, internal struggle stuff that we end up looking on in this episode, on the Friday episodes. So I went a little long because I love the book a lot and I think the concepts are big. And I also talked about everything from some of the more deeper biology issues to the more ethereal belief and mental health struggles. So I hope you enjoy this one. It's a little bit of a thought rant, but really a lot of Bruce's concepts are in there, and I think you're going to love it. We're going to have a link in here to the Biology of Belief. Go buy that book too. As I mentioned, we were lucky enough to have Bruce Lipton on the Ignited Relationships podcast, and I think that's actually not going to come out till June. So you have a little while to wait. But I don't want to make you just wait the whole time. So we're going to do a little intro to everything that I learned that is relevant to addiction from Bruce Lipton's Biology of Belief, Unleashing the Power of Consciousness and Matter and Miracles. So here's the thing that I love about this most is Bruce is a biologist in origin, a cell biologist. So he started out studying really basic processes within cells that make the cells function. And I don't know if you remember biology class, but you learned this stuff, right? It was like cell division, just mitosis, and you have like these internal metabolic processes that happen inside the cell, so the cell can use energy. That's that ATP stuff that you can remember learning about. And then the cell has these little organelles, these little things inside of it that process protein and food and can utilize that to create energy. And that's where he started, right? So he was studying the idea of small cell function. That's kind of where it all started for him. And the parallel that I kept seeing for myself was, I got into psychology studying neuroscience and statistics. So really kind of basic processes of learning and understanding. That's the neuroscience part. And then what do we do about it, which is statistics, and how do we analyze data and do studies and all that exciting stuff. And that's where I started. That's where I was still aiming at addiction, but I was looking at the basic mechanics. And one of the biggest lessons I think that came to me from the Biology of Belief book is that our bodies, and that includes our brains, our hearts, every other part of who we are, aren't going to be able to do anything that a cell can't do. And if you think about it, that's got to be true at a really deep level, right? Because if there's not a cell function that can create a certain behavior or a certain output, a certain outcome in a body, then the body, which is made up of a bunch of cells, won't be able to do it. So of course, different parts of the body do this differently. So like my eyes have cells that receive light information, right? It's like rods and cones, and when light hits them, they send the body a message saying, hey, we're seeing this dark over here and there's light over here. So they're receiving light information. But then there are cells in the ear that are receiving sound information. That's moving cells that when they get air movement, they interpret that as sound. Now, the cells are doing the same thing, right? They're receiving energy, and one it's sound energy, and another one it's light energy, and then they're translating that to. But if you think about it, that cell's doing essentially kind of a very similar function, just in different parts of the body. And one of the main points that I love about this book and Bruce's work in general is that what he says is we have decided to depend so much on the biology of things that we've overshot the mark. What do I mean by that? Well, hundreds of years ago, certainly thousands of years ago, but even hundreds of years ago, everything was about energy and gods and religion and belief about these other entities, right? These beings that were bigger than us that were creating the world. So God created the world, and in creating the world, he made all these animals, and he made weather, and he made oceans, and he made everything. And so we just accepted that there was something spiritual and bigger about everything around us, and we didn't know how it was going to operate. And no matter what we did, we weren't going to find out how it was going to operate because God controlled that. And then science came, and one of the things that science offered was a real explanation for how everything worked. So lightning was no longer this weird thing that a god threw down from the sky, but instead it was electrical charges. And when electricity came from negatively charged clouds and kind of got grounded into the earth, it created what we saw as lightning. And because lightning was this huge release of energy, it created thunder. Oh, okay, that's what that is. Great. And then, water, we started understanding how rain falls, or we just started having these biological explanations for everything. And eventually we got really biological explanations for humans and how we operate. And one of the big breaking discoveries in that was DNA. Now, even before we discovered the DNA, we were constantly making discoveries about humans and how we behave, right? Like blood flow. I mean, people have had notions about how the body operates for, again, hundreds and thousands of years, but it was this really ethereal stuff, like, from Indian culture and kind of the idea of chakras all the way to these ideas of the ethers of the body, right? So you had like different energies that flew through the body, and some of them were grounding and some of them were uplifting, etc. And then we discovered blood, and blood took on oxygen, and that fed different organs like the heart, and the lungs were able to absorb oxygen. We started breaking down the body into its components and understanding how we work, which if you think about it is pretty insane by itself, right? Like dogs, as far as we know, don't know how dogs walk or how they breathe or how they see or how they hear. They just are, right? They are born and then they kind of accept and live with the abilities that they have. They don't sit there and analyze it. We love analyzing things. And so we kept analyzing and we kept analyzing and we kept analyzing. And we started learning more and more about our biology. And eventually we got to the brain. We started understanding more and more about the brain. And when we learn more about the brain, we learn about neurons and how the brain is organized and about sodium and potassium going in and out of cells. And we started understanding our thinking. Definitely the first animals that we know of that started even thinking about our thinking, let alone understanding the biology behind our thinking. And that was really cool because, again, we have this insight into our mind, right? This metacognition, the idea that we get to observe our own thinking. And then DNA came around. And when the discovery of DNA came about, we finally had the blueprint. Like we had the code for how the cells in our body created themselves. Like literally it's the equivalent of if you are living in a home and then you get the blueprint for that home. Now you understand exactly what it went into constructing it. And so we went deep, like the Human Genome Project, and we went super deep into the idea that we will be able to, through genetics, fully understand how humans work. And then it wasn't just about biology anymore in terms of how I move my muscles or how tall I am or what color my eyes are or my hair. It moved far beyond that. And we said, well, if this is the blueprint for who we are, then this should also be the blueprint for all the conditions, all the diseases, everything that can happen to us in life. Because that's the same thing with the house, right? That was the idea. Is like the blueprint is what creates the house. And what Bruce talks about, which I love, and I will make the parallel to addiction and mental health here in a second, is Bruce said, we were actually wrong. The blueprint is not the house. They are not the same, right? The blueprint was the plan of what the house could be, what the house was meant to be, what the house was constructed to be. But if you have a home, you know that the home is, first of all, certainly not only the beams that hold it together and the flooring. The home is much more than the sum of those parts. And I'll go even one level beyond. Unlike a home, the body has its blueprint built into every cell. So why is it, like if the blueprint is where we're going to discover everything, why is it that my, fingertip has the same DNA as my eyes, which has the same DNA as every brain cell I have, which has the same DNA as my gut and my heart? There's something in our blueprint that tells the body, and therefore also the mind, what to create out of the blueprint. So like imagine that the equivalent with a house would be something like this. You put the blueprint on like a little tiny grain of sand, and then you build a house out of all that sand. But in our bodies and our brains, that sand creates in itself the being, right? Like the whole thing, the whole house would come alive from those individual grains of sand, which is pretty insane to think about, right? Because we have the little code and the code multiplies, and then all the cells within us become who we are. Some pretty powerful shit to think about, in my opinion. So there's got to be another piece of the puzzle. Like how do the individual pieces know what to become? And how does that then create who we are? And what we know is that is driven by environmental influence. So like we know that the way our brain knows to develop into a brain while our fingers develop into a finger is because there are chemical signals, etc., that are present in the environment when a baby is born when an embryo is developed, that allow all of that to differentiate. And then we come into the world, and if you think about it, up until pretty recently, the idea was your genetic material is in, and you are who you are going to be. This is like the biological scientific equivalent of you have fate. right? There's a fate. You have a biological predetermination. There's that movie. Why am I blanking on the name of it? We'll put it on here. Is it Attica? I don't remember. No, it's not. Gattaca. That's what it is. Gattaca. It was almost Attica. Gattaca, that movie where your genetic material purely defines what work you will do, who you will become, who you will be able to marry, all that stuff. It's like the movie equivalent of Brave New World. And the Human Genome Project really expected this. It expected that once we understand the blueprint fully, we'll be able to solve all disease. We will never have mental health disorders anymore. People will be able to kind of create this perfect race of humans. The problem is what we discovered is we're not that great at reading the material, and it seemed like the material was simpler than it should have been, given all the variability that humans have. And what we have to contend with, what we have to realize, and people ask me this all the time. People say, well, what if I just have the addictive gene? My mom was an addict. My dad was an addict. Her uncle was an addict. Everybody in my family has been an addict. What if I just have that gene? And I'm sorry to break it to everybody paying attention right now. There is no such thing as an addiction gene. Does not exist. There's no alcoholic gene. There are genes that affect how you respond to alcohol, but it is absolutely not true that if you have one of them, you are an alcoholic, and if you have another one, you are not. So there's no alcoholic gene. There's no genetic gene that tells you whether you will have schizophrenia or depression or anxiety. What happens instead is there is a marriage of our biology, right? So our biology comes from one direction and our environment comes from another. And environment means a lot of things. It means your experience, right? What you're exposed to in the world. So like if you've ever been through trauma or you've been bullied, if you think about it, that is stuff happening in the environment that affects your biology, your being, your body, your brain, and then changes it. And so at a very basic level, the interaction between biology and environment, that creates who we are. Now, why do I think this is so monumental? And there are so many other pieces in this, and we will get into some of them. I don't know that we'll get into all of them today. Maybe I'll do a follow-up one to this. But if you even just go this far and think about it, and we've known this in the science of addiction, we ignore it a lot, but in the science literature of addiction, we know that there are environmental risk factors, things that make it more likely that people will struggle with depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, addiction, compulsion, phobias, all of that. We know that there are risk factors. We always have. And yet somehow, because we've been in this age of chemistry and biology and science, we've believed that still at its core, the way we are, our personality, our quirks, our tendencies is still primarily biological. But if we know that biology and environment interact, right, that they have to join together. This is in the abstinence myth when I talk about biology, psychology, environment, and spirituality, I'm talking about the same thing, right? Because environment has a few different factors. I just broke them down. There's the environment, literally, like the home, the air, the sun, what happens with people around me. And then there's psychology, the interaction of those people with my mind. And so what Dr. Lipton talks about in the book is the environment activates our biology. The environment activates specific genes or does not. There's this science called epigenetics, and maybe I'll do a whole show on that one day by itself. But epigenetics is literally a science that explains how different genes get turned on and turned off in the brain and in the body to create our experiences. Now, here's the magic. The magic is that now, through epigenetic research, we know that there are very specific environmental influences that can create biological interference. And I don't know if I can get a drum roll, but one of those big ones is stress in all of its forms. So trauma, psychological, biological, sexual abuse as a kid. We did an article on childhood events, adverse childhood experiences, ACEs. Those are stressors. right? Now think about, for all of you guys listening right now, and especially if you struggle with anxiety or depression or any other mental health issue, or you know people in your life who do, any of those people really live in stress-free environments? Does that even happen? And so for the longest time, there have been people in the field that have tried to argue environment or biology. And what I love about the book is it helps people find a real path to the fact that it is both. So yes, there's no addiction gene and there's no specific addiction risk factor, right? Like you can have an alcoholic dad and not become an alcoholic. Again, I don't love the term alcoholic, but I'm having the language. So you can have somebody, you can have a dad, you can grow up in a household with a father who really struggles with drinking and drinks too much and then gets violent and angry or isolated or whatever his experience is. And you can grow up in that household and not end up developing a problem with alcohol. But we know that growing up in that sort of a household is a risk factor for it. Why? A, because you have the biological contribution, but also because now you have the environmental influence. Like growing up with a father like that is really stressful, and stressful at a really early age. So it creates unhelpful beliefs, and it creates activation in something called the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which is a part of your brain and body that drives your fight or flight response. And when we have this sort of an understanding of why people get depressed, why they get anxious, why they get addicted to substances, we move away from the archaic, insane, old school notion that there is something damaged about people who struggle with this stuff. Because it's just not that simple. But we do it so often. We tell people so often, well, you have this condition. I was just talking today on our 21-day habit reset challenge about an old client that I had at the old treatment center that I was running. And when she first met me, she had all the conditions. She had 6 diagnoses: borderline, bipolar, generalized anxiety disorder, 3 different addictions. And everybody in her family and everybody who treated her up to that point believed she was screwed for life. We just didn't buy it. And so we treated her a totally different way. And I tell this story in other settings, like in an online workshop and a bunch of different things like that. But she came to us, she couldn't even sit in a chair for 30 minutes. She was so anxious and stressed out. She would have to go to a cigarette break and her back was hurting, and she couldn't hold a job. She couldn't live on her own. It was intense. And she's now graduating from grad school, takes no medication, is absolutely over her diagnosed disorders, has no addiction problems, and is happy. So what creates that difference, right? Where is the truth? And what I love about the biology of belief and Bruce's work is too long we have depended on these biological explanations for things that happen in our world. And sure, we process information about the environment through our body, through our machine, through the biology of who we are. But we can change that perception. And when we change that perception, our reality changes. You see, unlike a lot of other animals, through that introspection, through the insight that we have into our thinking and other people's thinking and what influences us and what influences others and what makes us sleep better, eat better, survive longer. Through that in-depth understanding of who we are, we actually play an active role in the lens through which we see the world. I want to say that again. Unlike all other animals, we can impact our own perspective and our own beliefs in the world. Now think about the power of that, right? If you've grown up thinking that you're a loser, thinking you'll never amount to anything, thinking that you're a waste of space or you're hopeless, I guarantee that's affected the way you've lived. If you know somebody who's gone through the same thing, I guarantee it's affected the way they live. It is pretty hard to think that of yourself. I'm a loser, I'm unmotivated, I'm stupid, I'm fat, whatever your version of it is. And wake up every morning and go, but you know what? Fuck it. I'm going to go and do the best that I can and make this world my oyster and just kill it. Just go every day and just do my best. It's hard. Why? Because the internal belief is that you don't have the ability, you don't have the wherewithal to get that done. So why would you try? But if we understand that that is driven by the belief, then if we can shift the belief, we can shift the way we respond to the world. Now, somebody on my 21-day challenge today said, okay, that's nice to say, but what if the belief is true? And I love that question. I love that question because it's such a great fallback, right? What if I really am stupid? What if I really am lazy? Some of the people who have had struggles, internal struggles, that showed them that they were no good before we found them to be successful, you wouldn't believe. Like Thomas Edison, the best, most famous inventor of all times, was essentially kicked out of school because he was too stupid. Thomas fucking Edison kicked out of school because he was too stupid. Literally became the best inventor of all times. Albert Einstein had a similar story. Could not function in regular education. Became literally one of the smartest men as we perceive intelligence to this day. Right? So what is truth? When you say, well, maybe I really am dumb, what does that mean? Through whose lens? I'm looking at some of these other stories and they're crazy. They're insane. Like Steven Spielberg being rejected from film school 3 times. So is the truth that Steven Spielberg is just a terrible director and should not be in film? We get to accept our truth. And as long as you ask yourself that question, let me tell you something. The only reason that you are considering that truth to see whether it is true or not, the only reason you're considering this belief is true or not is because of the behavior up until this point. But, and we know this from cognitive behavioral therapy, your actions are so driven by your perspective on the world that right now you can't isolate the belief you have from the actions that follow. Because if you believe you're stupid, you're not going to try for things that smart people try for. You know, I graduated from high school at the bottom 50th percent of my class. Bottom 50th percent. I had a 2.68 GPA, I think, in high school. Now, I took AP classes because I was smart, but I sucked at school. So is the truth that I'm a horrible student? That's what everybody believed. But when I went to get my master's and I had a 4.0, all of a sudden I was a really good student. So which one is the truth? And I'll turn this on you and I'll leave you with this. First of all, read this book, The Biology of Belief. You're going to want to do it. Secondly, what if you were able to switch your negative beliefs about yourself and about other people close to you into beliefs that served you in terms of where you want to go? What if we just open that window up? What if we just say to ourselves, you know what? I am just going to accept that this is my truth. I'm going to accept that I am capable. Maybe I haven't learned how to be a good student yet, but that I could be. Maybe I haven't learned how to write well, or maybe my books haven't been accepted for publication yet, but they can be. Because one of the other pieces that I love from the book, and again, this is what I'll leave you guys for today at least, is when we are in fear and when we are in negative thinking patterns about ourselves and the world, our brains, our bodies go into survival mode. And in that survival mode, through the activation of a whole slew of biological processes, and especially kind of those fight or flight responses that we have around anxiety and depression, things of that nature, we stunt our ability to grow. We turn off our ability to enlarge and expand and learn. So even if it's just for the possibility of it, even if it's just for the game of it, start adopting the sense of positivity. Start working towards a bias in finding the things that are working versus the things that are not. Because in doing that, you will change your behavior and you will change your reality. And as that happens, you'll start being able to believe more and more that you are the positive sum of what you have done, and not instead focus all of your attention on the aspects, the elements of your being that haven't been working, that need help, that you'd like to change. I'm not saying that there's no space to work on changing those. There is, but we've got to start from a place of acceptance, a place of hope, and a place of belief in ourselves. All right. That's enough food for thought. See you next week. Thank you for tuning in to the Ignited Heroes Recovery Podcast. I really hope you found the information here useful and that we'll see you back here next week. And look, I want to make sure that this podcast is the most useful it can be for you, so please let me know by emailing info@ignited.com if there are any specific topics or questions you'd like to have addressed. As usual, if you like this episode, I would love for you to leave us a 5-star review and rating. Thanks, and see you next week.